What's up, everybody? Chris Pennell here. I'm going over my running back tier rankings for week 7 of the fantasy football season. If you do enjoy, or even if you don't, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you just want to call me ugly in the comments, go for it, but I'd love to hear from you. And before we get into it, I should mention the bye weeks here. And there's actually a decent amount of good running backs that are going to be missing this week due to their bye weeks. Say the Cincinnati Bengals with Joe Mixon, Tony Pollard of the Cowboys, Derrick Henry of the Titans, Damian Pierce of the Texans, Breece Hall of the Jets, and Miles Sanders or Chuba Hubbard, whichever one you have, on the Carolina Panthers. I might be missing one, but a decent amount of running backs missing there. So the running back rankings this week are going to look a little bit depleted, but we're going to start in the elite tier. And I think number one, depending on the health, we're not sure what's going to happen quite yet, but Christian McCaffrey has to be in the number one spot if he's going to be good to go. As of right now, though, nobody knows if he's going to miss this week, miss the next few weeks, get put on IR, end up playing this week. That's a complete guessing game. But in the assumption that he does play, because I don't know where to put him I don't know where to put him in the assumption that he doesn't play. You got to talk about him at least. So we're going to put him number one here. He's my highest projected running back on the week. It's a good matchup versus Minnesota. And we know his involvement in the passing game. We know his involvement in the run game. Elite usage, elite talent, elite team. Nothing not to like here. Pretty much a lock in for 20 plus touches every single week. So if he is good to go, even if he's at 90, 80%, shoot, even 70%, you're still putting him in your lineups. But the assumption of fully good to go puts him at number one for me. And then at number two, probably not a familiar number two most weeks, but it's Kenneth Walker for me of the Seattle Seahawks. Gets a great matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. 26-point implied team total for the Seahawks at home, 7.5-point favorite. Pretty much checks every single box for me. He's going to get you 15 plus touches with a little bit of involvement in the passing game. He's a big favorite. He plays at home, and he gets a dream matchup. So there's really nothing not to like here. He's a touchdown scoring machine this season at 1.2 touchdowns per game. Cardinals allow over 100 rushing yards and roughly 24 fantasy points per game to the running back position. So load up on Ken Walker with confidence. And coming in number three, it's just a volume hog here. It's Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders. The quarterback situation looks a bit shaky this week, but that just means the ball is going to Josh Jacobs. Now, he has been horribly inefficient this season, less than 3 yards per carry, which not great. But if you're going to give me 20 plus touches versus the Bears defense, that's just not good versus running backs in general. They're currently 28th versus the position, which means they allow the 5th most, close to 28 fantasy points allowed per game. And they kind of get beat up through the air, which we know Josh Jacobs has been highly involved in the passing game this season. Even had a game where he had 11 targets, averaging over 5 targets per game and close to an 18% target share. So yeah, Josh Jacobs, definitely an elite play this week, no matter what the quarterback situation happens to be. RB4 for me is Raheem the Dream Mostert facing off versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, last week he had an absolute cakewalk matchup versus the Carolina Panthers. He was my RB1 overall, projection-wise, even over a guy like Christian McCaffrey. Absolutely smashed versus the Panthers, which is what you expect from that offense facing that defense. Bit of a tougher spot here. The Philadelphia Eagles are allowing less than 50 rushing yards per game, only 32 receiving yards. I'm giving up any receiving touchdowns and barely anything on the ground either, touchdown-wise. So this is definitely Mostert's probably toughest task of the season, but this game is going to be extremely high scoring, at least projected so in Vegas. 51.5 point over-under, 2-point spread, and the Dolphins on a 25-point implied team total. If you are running back on one of the best offenses in football, you're the RB1, and you're guaranteed 15 plus touches with involvement in the passing game, you pretty much have to be in the top 5 no matter the matchup. So even though it sucks, we're still rolling out Mostert with confidence. And coming in at number 5 to round out our elite tier group of running backs this week, it's Austin Ekeler of the Los Angeles Chargers. And when you're a running back that's so involved in the passing game, always going to be in the elite group no matter the matchup. And this should be a decently high scoring game. Now, the Kansas City Chiefs have just been a pretty solid defense overall this season. They've been tough versus the pass. They've also been tough versus the run, allowing the 5th fewest points per game to the running back position. But Austin Ekeler with his elite role in this pretty good offense led by Justin Herbert, 15 carries per game. It's a smaller sample size because he has missed quite some time, but again, 15 carries, 41 receiving yards on 5 targets per game. It's 15.5% target share on offense. So throws the ball quite a bit. I'll take it. So you're not sitting Austin Ekeler in any situation, even though he didn't have the biggest game in his return versus the Dallas Cowboys. But even then, that wasn't a great matchup either. Moving on to our tier 2 running backs. We'll have to see if he plays or not. It's been a while for Aaron Jones, but he gets the dream matchup that everybody asked for against the Denver Broncos. I mean, the most points in the running back position at 40.7, 150 rushing yards per game, 1.3 rushing touchdowns, and 53 receiving yards, over 6 catches, and nearly 3/4 of a receiving touchdown per game. They are just getting absolutely obliterated by running backs this year. And while Aaron Jones, we just haven't really seen him on the field this season. If he is good to go, and he is healthy and he's going to see a decent share of this backfield. That's going to be extremely valuable. If Jones happens to be out, you can probably put A.J. Dillon almost in the tier 2. I'd have to see how the projections lay out for that, but Aaron Jones, definitely someone you'd have to start this week given the matchup. Alvin Kamara, another running back that features some pass catching upside. Smaller sample size for him because he was suspended for the first few weeks, but still averaging nearly 8.5 targets per game on a 22% target share and getting close to 20 carries per game. Not as good of a matchup as Aaron Jones has versus the Denver Broncos, but the Jacksonville Jaguars, kind of middle of the pack versus running backs, but there's not really a situation where you're benching Alvin Kamara. Saquon Barkley, even though the offense is absolutely dreadful, I'm not sure who's going to start yet at quarterback. I don't think it matters. Barkley still got over 100 total yards last week versus the Buffalo Bills with Tyrod Taylor under center. Not the greatest matchup in the world versus the Commanders. They're allowing the 11th fewest points per game to the running back position, less than 20 total. But when you have a guy that has over 20 total opportunities every single week with a decent chunk of that being in the passing game, we're talking a 17% target share. The offense sucks. The offensive line isn't very good, but Barkley is super talented, and the volume can kind of make up for that. I wouldn't expect like a ceiling game from Barkley, but you're not benching him, obviously. Bijan Robinson comes in at number 9 here, the rookie, who's had a pretty good season so far, just not really getting into the end zone much, which is unfortunate. The volume is still there, and honestly, he has almost identical numbers to Saquon Barkley this season. So let me just read off their stats. So Saquon Barkley is at 69 rushing yards per game. Bijan Robinson's at 66.8. 17 carries per game for Saquon Barkley, but only 13 for Bijan. We know Tyler Algier does take some work from him. 0 rushing touchdowns per game for Bijan, 0.3 for Barkley. 4 yards per carry, 5 yards per carry for Bijan, so he's been a bit more efficient. But he's been a little bit better in the passing game, where he's getting double the receiving yards at 31 compared to 15 for Barkley, both at 5.3 targets per game, both at 4.3 catches, 18.3% target share compared to a 17.1% target share. So they've had some pretty identical numbers this year, and both offenses obviously aren't that great with not good quarterback play. So they look just about the same for me. I haven't projected for just about the same, and the matchups, as crazy as it sounds, the matchups are the exact same. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are allowing the 11th fewest points per game, 18.5, which is the exact same as the Washington Commanders. So I just want to point that out, that almost identical this week in terms of production and the matchup this week. But obviously Bijan is a locked and loaded RB1 every single week. Then Travis Etienne, who has the most touches in football by anybody at 134 this year, which is awesome to see, because I think at the beginning of the season, there was a lot of Tank Bigsby hype, and Doug Peterson wanted to use multiple running backs. Hasn't really been the case. Tank Bigsby is completely irrelevant, and Travis Etienne absolutely eats every single week. Now, the reason he's kind of this low is because the quarterback situation is a little bit up in the air, and I wouldn't say this is a good matchup versus New Orleans Saints. They've had a pretty good run defense for a couple of years now, and so far this season, they are allowing the second fewest points per game, 69 rushing yards, and they have yet to allow a rushing touchdown this season. But we're locked and loaded for 20 plus touches, and in fantasy football, that is going to make you a bona fide RB1. Moving on to tier 3, these are borderline RB1s and high-end RB2s, so you're probably starting them unless you have an absolute luxury at the RB position, which I highly doubt you do. So to kick off tier 3, we are looking at DeAndre Swift, starting running back of the Philadelphia Eagles, which is always going to be a highly valuable role. The only annoying part is that whenever they get around the goal line, there's always the chance of Jalen Hurts to steal some work. And plus, they do involve some other running backs, as well like Kenny Gainwell. But DeAndre Swift definitely has the lion's share of this backfield, averaging roughly 14 carries per game this season, just over 4 targets, 13% target share. Decent matchup versus Miami. They're kind of mid-pack, below average versus running backs, but this is going to be a very high-scoring game. Second highest implied team total of the slate here for the Philadelphia Eagles, so there's always some good scoring equity there. So like DeAndre Swift did catch a touchdown last week as well. Then Isaiah Pacheco, RB1 of the Kansas City Chiefs, and if he's going to be involved in the passing game like we saw last week where he had 6 targets and 6 catches, I mean, if we're just going to kick Jerick McKinnon to the curb, and obviously we hope that Clyde Edwards-Helaire just doesn't get any work because he's not very good. So if it's just the Isaiah Pacheco show, you can pretty much fire him up as a low-end RB1 almost every single week. Now, they love to throw the football, so it's the only downside, but 27-point implied team total, which is the highest of any team this week. They're 5.5-point favorites. They're at home, and it's a great matchup versus Los Angeles Chargers. They currently rank 23rd versus running backs, having 24.4 DraftKings points per game. All right, now we get into the RB2s, and a lot of these guys are very close. I don't think there's like a massive difference from any of them, really. But we're going to put Brian Robinson here at number 13. It's a great matchup versus the Giants and running backs. Just eat versus them every single week. They're ranked 26th versus the position, allowing over 130 rushing yards per game and also over 1 touchdown. Not really giving up too much in the receiving game, which is not really Brian Robinson's forte anyway. Now, the thing with him is if he doesn't fall into the end zone, you're usually not too excited with the output because he's not that big of a threat in the passing game. we're talking just 2 targets per game on a 6% target share. But if he's going to get you 10, 15 carries on the ground, and if he's going to get the goal line carries, yeah, that's going to be valuable in this matchup. And moving on to 14, we have Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. I'm not going to completely buy into the Kareem Hunt hype. I know the snaps have been rising, but he's still a little bit old and he's still a little bit washed. Jerome Ford is definitely still the best back in this backfield, in my opinion. He was pretty good last week. I know Kareem Hunt got into the end zone, but he's still at 17 carries on the ground, still at snapped Hunt, still out touched him, was getting the carries at the end of the game. Although I think Kareem Hunt did come in just to get the field goal ready. But other than that, I mean, Jerome Ford is still the better back here, right around 5 yards per carry in last week's game. And this is a much better matchup than the 49ers. We get the Indianapolis Colts this week, so I am pretty high on some of the Browns this week, like Amari Cooper, Deshaun Watson if he ends up playing, and Jerome Ford. I am fine on all the offensive pieces here, so Jerome Ford does make the RB2 range for me. After that, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, who looks like we're going to be without David Montgomery this week. And as of right now, Jahmyr Gibbs is not 100% locked into playing, but he is trending in the right direction per the coach. And if he's going to be the starting running back, I realize Craig Reynolds will probably steal some carries still because the Lions hate Jahmyr Gibbs for some reason, but the talent's there. And if you are in a PPR scoring league, Jahmyr Gibbs, we've seen games where he gets 9 targets. So if he's going to get his 5+ targets with 10+ carries on the ground, that's pretty valuable from an explosive player like Jahmyr Gibbs. So he's definitely an RB2 this week. And there's potential for more. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes into that RB1 range. Moving down to tier 4, got to put him in tier 4 because we just have no idea what to expect from him. But welcome to Fantasy Relevancy, Zach Evans. If you don't know who it is, he's a 6th-round rookie from TCU. No Kyren Williams, no Ronnie Rivers, and it looks like both those guys are going to be out for quite some time. So Zach Evans, if you picked him up on waivers or you outbid everybody for Fab, congratulations. I think you found yourself a solid RB1 for about a month or so now. And we know the starting running back for a Sean McVay-led offense is always going to have value. And this is a pretty good matchup versus the Steelers. I know in the past, always viewed as a pretty tough defense, but they're currently 24th versus running backs, allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. And Royce Freeman would be the only other option in this backfield. He is a better pass blocker than I would say for Evans, so he could lose some work there, but he still should be the guy that gets the first crack at it. So I'm definitely in on Evans here. Next, we have James Cook, starting running back for the Buffalo Bills. Latavius Murray is going to be annoying. He's going to steal some goal line work, but James Cook is still in line for a decent role here and one of the better offenses in football, over 12 carries per game. Gets a handful of targets. You're going to be 15+ here versus New England Patriots defense. That's bottom half of the league versus fantasy running backs this season. I will take it. There's always going to be touchdown equity, but Latavius Murray will be annoying. Ramondre Stevenson left the game briefly last week, ended up coming back, got into the end zone. The only issue I have with Stevenson, because we know the upside, we saw how elite he was last year in his role, but the Patriots offense is just so bad right now. I feel like Mac Jones gets benched every week at some point, and we're going to see some Malik Cunningham, which I think is probably not good for Ramondre Stevenson. But right now, the Buffalo Bills are not good versus running backs. They're ranking 25th versus the position, allowing over 25 points per game and over 100 rushing yards, and giving it up a little bit in the passing game, which we know Stevenson is currently capable of doing damage there. So I think he's a fine RB2, but the expectations are very low as with everybody else in this offense. And it's not going to feel good here, but Alexander Mattison, yes, K-Makers is there. He's going to steal some work, but we're still going to get double-digit touches. And at this point in the running back tiers, if you can get double-digit touches on a halfway decent offense that can put up points, you're going to be playable. It's not going to be fun, but you never know. You can waltz into the end zone. And on the plus side, he is seeing 4+ targets per game this year, which is a pretty nice added floor as well. And rounding out tier 4, and honestly, this guy could end up being a little bit higher for me. We just don't have news yet that he's completely back. So, well, at least by the time I'm recording this, maybe by the time this is out, that has changed. But Roschon Johnson here is going to round out the top 20. And with no Khalil Herbert, Deontay Foreman's still going to get work, so he's not going to completely go away. So it's not just going to be his backfield. But I would say Roschon Johnson is definitely the more talented back of the bunch here. They're just dealing with injuries. Justin Fields is going to be out, so he's not going to start rushing attempts away. So Roschon Johnson would definitely find himself in a pretty decent role here and a good matchup versus the Raiders. Moving on to tier 5, and this is where it gets pretty ugly. Unfortunately, a lot of us with the bye weeks this week were probably in this range if you're in a deeper league, but there's really not too much separating them. I have Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss basically the exact same this week. I don't understand why they paid Jonathan Taylor so much when Zach Moss can pretty much do the same thing at this point. I know Taylor had an amazing year not too long ago, but I mean, let's be honest, running back position in the NFL outside of like maybe a couple of guys is just plug and play for the most part. Yes, there is absurd talents like Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Nick Chubb, but I mean, other than just a few guys out there, it's just really just a plug and play. at the position. But Taylor, Moss, they'll split, but the matchup's terrible versus Cleveland. I wouldn't feel confident about it, but I mean, they are going to get work. Obviously, the passing game isn't the absolute bright spot for the Indianapolis Colts, and their offense in general just isn't that great. And I think they're going to struggle versus the Browns, but these guys will get work, probably close to around double-digit touches apiece. Up next, Rachaad White. He has a starting role, plays a good amount of snaps, and he's going to get work. He gets roughly 15 to 18 opportunities per game. We're talking 14, 15 carries on the ground with a handful of targets. The Buccaneers offense, led by Baker Mayfield, isn't exactly the greatest show on turf, but he's viable and he gets work. Not a good matchup versus Atlanta, though. They're currently allowing the third fewest points per game to the position. So hopefully you have other options, but at least he will get volume. You pretty much just have to hope he falls into the end zone, though, but that is not really something that has happened too often with Rachaad White this year, unfortunately. Javonte Williams, it's a very crowded backfield. You have McLaughlin back there, Javonte Williams, and Samaje Perine, so it's really annoying to try to pick who you want to start. But Javonte would be your number one priority here, and it's a pretty good matchup versus Green Bay, currently allowing the fourth fewest points per game to the position. So if you are in desperate need, we know Javonte's talented. It's a good matchup, but good luck playing roulette there at the running back position. D'Onta Foreman, if by chance Roschon Johnson was not able to go, he'd have to jump up in the rankings here. And I don't think he's going to completely go away, even if Roschon Johnson is indeed playing, which I'm assuming he is. He's still going to get some touches, but it'll definitely be a step back from what we saw last week. And then we're scraping the bottom of the barrel here. We have A.J. Dillon, who just does not look good when he's on the field. Only 3 yards per carry this season. He has to get an absurd amount of volume for him to get there. And goal line work, which we saw versus the Raiders in that primetime game. But if Aaron Jones is back, it's definitely a big hit. If he happens to be out, though, we could probably see him jump into that like tier 4, tier 3 range just because of the matchup and the potential volume that he will get. Although Patrick Taylor would end up stealing some work as well. Jaylen Warren, I actually have him above Najee Harris here just because of his involvement in the passing game. It currently owns a 16% target share, 33 receiving yards per game, and nearly 5 targets. Najee Harris is it's just dreadful to watch him out there. It is at nearly 4 yards per carry, though, which is a little bit higher than what you'd expect, but not really getting anything at all in the passing game and only 50 yards per game, and he is yet to find the end zone on the ground. So it's just really tough to trust Najee these days. He's completely touchdown or bust at this point. At least Jaylen Warren gives you some upside in PPR leagues. Kareem Hunt, we saw the snaps up to nearly 40% last week. Jerome Ford is still my preferred option, but I do think Kareem Hunt will get enough volume and enough snaps to make him at least viable. It's a good matchup versus the Colts. And if the Browns are leading, they will obviously spell Jerome Ford with Kareem Hunt, so I'm fine with that. Plus, he will be a little bit involved in the passing game. Najee Harris, I just kind of talked bad about him, but he still gets enough work to make him viable as a very low end RB2 or RB3. And then the last pick, mystery relevant here, RB number 30 for me this week. It's going to be Gus Edwards of the Baltimore Ravens. And I will tell you what, there is no in between with him. You're either getting 5 points with your 50 rushing yards, or you're getting 11 points because he had 50 rushing yards and a touchdown. So just hope he gets into the end zone if you are in an absolute pinch at the running back position this week. But that will conclude. With that being said, that's all I got for you guys for today's video. If you did enjoy, make sure you like down below, subscribe on your way out. If you have any questions about your own lineups or any start-sit decisions, leave them down below. I'm more than happy to answer you. So I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you all next time.